Okay, we're moving on to the next section of personality. And here we're going to be looking at trait theories of personality. And this one, what they're looking at, they want to know how we could use traits to describe personality. So it's a little bit different than the approaches. Okay, now trait theorists, write this down, is they're going to focus on observable and more measurable traits. So here we could see a little bit more when it comes to like the scientific stuff behind it, right? Empirical data, just a little bit, because how you collect it is a little bit more challenging. All right, so let's start. Should have written some stuff down. I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible, but please make sure to pause and write down. Don't just run through it and just write a couple things. Like every little thing is as important as the next, okay? So first one is going to be traits. What exactly are traits? And traits are stable personality characteristics of our behavior, thought process, and emotions. Okay, so they're personality characteristics that are from our behavior, thought process, and emotions. Now, for traits, we focus on observable personality characteristics, which help us determine how we behave across time and situations. And this is kind of like trying to predict how we are going to act. Okay? Be sure to write all of that down there. So, first guy you need to know, there's a lot of names in this unit. I know, sucks. But Gordon Allport. He's going to be the first to develop a comprehensive theory centered on traits. Okay? He's going to describe personalities in terms of fundamental traits, and he is going to reject environmental factors. Okay? And he basically states that personality is guided by about 5 to 10 central traits that we're born with. Okay? Now we go on to the next guy. So he's the one that kind of started it. Then we go into on Raymond Cattell. Raymond Cattell is very important. I like to use him all the time here. And this, why is he so important, is because he started using a statistical method called factor analysis, okay, to identify clusters of traits related to each other, okay? And as you'll see here, this is kind of like his, one of his 16 source traits that he has, okay? Now, what is factor analysis? And you need to know this. So factor analysis is a statistical procedure used to identify clusters of items, okay? Then they're going to analyze multiple variables that are correlated with one another, these items, and then they identify how those correlations connect with each other. Okay, make sure to write this down. And it allowed to connect the different traits into clusters. Okay, and so what basically it means is that you're trying to get like reserved and outgoing are kind of in a cluster. And what they'll do in a test, okay, and you'll see this in like personality test, is that they'll have a bunch of questions that are related to those items, right? And then they'll cluster them together and then get an analysis of that. Okay, so let's say for questions, there's and I'll talk about that MMPI. It's a personality test. Typically used to diagnose people with personality disorders, and it's like 300 and something questions. But what they do is, since it's also self-reporting, they what they make the person do is answer all the questions. And let's say, for example, questions 1, 10, 15, 20 are all about their how serious or happy they are, right? So then what they'll do is, depending on how the person answers, they'll combine those items together, cluster them together, and then give you the results of like that trait. Okay, so it's kind of just clustering items that are similar or correlated with one another. And these are basically these correlations, okay, is what you see here with these traits, okay, the source traits. Now, what ends up happening is that it actually created two types of traits, and we're still writing here. We have the surface traits, which are observable behaviors, and then he says there's source traits, which are basically 16 fundamental characteristics that drive personality and then result in observable surface traits. Okay, and the way what he developed was this test called the 16 personality factor psychometric questionnaire. Okay, and then this was just a way to organize those source traits into 16 pairs. And in that questionnaire, what it'll be, they'll use factor analysis, and as you're asking all these questions, they'll cluster the items together to then get the trait, basically the source trait that you have, okay, or the rating of that. All right, so that's Raymond Cattell. Then we're gonna have Hans Sibyl Eisnick, but it's this little thing, and I would definitely write this down. I'm expecting to see this in your notebook. I'm gonna write it down because I have seen this so many times on the test, or they talk about it. So it's quite important that you guys know it and understand it, okay? Now, these guys, Hans and Sibyl, are going to use factor analysis to analyze traits, and they came up with 3 genetically influenced dimensions, okay? Now, they call these 3 dimensions of personality your temperaments, okay? Now, these 3 are, ready, and write that down, is extroversion slash introversion, okay? And you'll see it here, extroversion and introversion. And this is just meaning the need for either more external stimulus or less external stimulus. Make sure to write that down. Okay, so obviously extroversion, they need more external stimulus. Introversion needs less external stimulus, which is like the environment. Then you have neuroticism and slash stability. Those things go together. And that's just the degree of emotional stability. Okay, neuroticism is really high up there, and then stable is more calm. Then you have the psychotism and socialization. And this is the degree of aggression and non-conformity. Okay? And so what they're basically saying is that these traits fall in, right? They cluster them into these different things. So like if you're extroverted, but you're more neurotic, these are typically the traits you're going to have. If you're extroverted but more stable, these are typically the traits you're going to have, and so forth, right? Introverted but neurotic, these are your the traits, and then introverted but stable, these are, okay? So it just gives you an idea of how theirs works. And the combinations between them. All right. So now we go to the next one, which is Paul Costa and Robert McCrae. And they developed a list of 5 traits or factors called the 5-factor model, or it's also called the Big 5. Okay, now the way that they organize this, and make sure you're writing all this down, they organize this by using 5 adjectives. Okay, and they are openness, and I'll write it down, openness, conscientiousness. Should have written this down, sorry. So conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and then the last one is going to be neuroticism. Now, I'm not sure why, but that's a 9. Try your best. I know it's all neuroticism, it's with a T. Okay, so this is short for, and a good way to remember is ocean. Okay, So make sure you have that. And I'm going to show you a next slide, and I do want you to write it down. We're going to do like a little quiz as well. You guys are going to actually do the Big Five test to see where you land in this kind of spectrum of these words. But you definitely need to know what they mean. And then this is just based on like questionnaires, okay? Now, I'm going to move this to the side so that you could write this down. This must be in your notebook. Must be in notes. Okay, so what does it mean? So you see here you have your openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so you're kind of like in this spectrum, right? So some people may be more over here on this side, others on this, kind of some people in the middle, and you guys will do this little quiz and you'll find out. But openness is basically this, if you're all the way here in this level, you're more down to earth, narrow interest, conventional. Then you have here, openness is more creative, imaginative, okay, untraditional. Then you have your conscientiousness is the lower end is unreliable, they're careless, disorganized, tend to be more impulsive. Over here, they tend to be more punctual, very organized, disciplined. Then you have the extroversion. On this side, you'll be more reserved, withdrawn, quiet. And then on this side, you'll be more social, assertive, and so forth. Then you have agreeableness, and this one you tend to be more a little bit more aloof, suspicious, irritable, or critical. And then here is more amiable, cooperative, trusting, forgiving, and so forth. And then neuroticism is that, just like the other one. And this one is more calm, secure, hardy, while the other one would be, if you're all the way over here, you're more anxious, depressed, easily stressed. Okay. I will say College Board, I'm not sure why they love to use some of these, and they'll just put, a 5-factor model of openness, explain, so things like that. So just make sure that you understand all of them. And then if there's any questions, we ask it in the class. All right. And then the last one is assessing trait theories. Now, some strengths, right, of assessing trait theories is there's a correlation among traits and our patterns in behaviors, right? If I'm an extrovert, and you know that I'm easygoing and responsive and talkative, that's predictable, right? I know that that's gonna be that person's traits or when I approach them. But not always, right? Because we're not always feeling that way. Weakness can also is that the research method is used by self-reporting. And as you guys know, self-serving bias plays into effect. And it also doesn't explain why certain behaviors and traits have developed. Okay, just as I kind of like, here it is. And then situations, right? Situations, they don't take into account situations can be a variable in how we act, right? This is why when we could act one way with a group of people and then totally different in another, doesn't mean we're being fake, it's just the situation, okay? And that's basically it for this one.